Vlad III, also known as Vlad Dracula, was a historical figure who ruled Wallachia in the 15th century. Over time, his brutal reputation gave rise to myths that transformed him into one of history's most infamous rulers. While his actual life was shaped by the political and military conflicts of medieval Europe, popular culture has merged reality with fiction, largely due to Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. But who was the real Vlad? And how? Name Dracula means son of the dragon and was derived from his father, Vlad II Dracul, who was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to defending Christianity against the Ottoman Empire. At the time, Dracul referred to a dragon, but in modern Romanian it has come to mean devil, which has further fueled the association between Vlad III and dark, supernatural imagery. Unlike Stoker's vampire, Vlad Dracula was not. Used fear as a weapon. His reign was marked by cruelty, mass executions, and impalement, a method of execution that became synonymous with his name. However, these acts were not merely expressions of sadism. They were part of a broader strategy to instill terror in his enemies and maintain control over a politically unstable region. Despite his notoriety, Vlad was also considered a brilliant strategist and military leader. He fought tirelessly against the Ottoman, resisted external pressures from Hungary and rival noble families. His methods may have been extreme, but for some, he was a necessary defender of Wallachian independence. Even today, perspectives on Vlad vary. Some see him as a monstrous tyrant, while others regard him as a national hero who protected his people from foreign invasion. Although his historical rule was marked by violence, it was not Vlad himself who created the vampire legend. The connection between emerged centuries later when Stoker borrowed his name and reputation to craft the fictional character of Dracula. This fusion of history and horror ensured that Vlad's legacy would live on, not just in history books, but in countless adaptations of vampire folklore in literature, film, and pop culture. Ultimately, Vlad Dracula was a ruler caught between myth and reality. While historical records describe a ruthless but strategic leader, his transformation into a testament to how history and storytelling intertwine, turning a medieval warlord into an immortal legend. Vlad III rule over Wallachia was marked by extreme brutality, earning him the infamous nickname Vlad the Impaler. His harsh methods of justice and punishment have been both condemned as excessive cruelty and praised as necessary discipline in a lawless and treacherous time. But was he truly the monstrous figure many believe him to be, or was his reign simply medieval world? The most notorious method of execution associated with Vlad was impalement. He had his enemies, ranging from rival nobles to foreign invaders, impaled on wooden stakes, often arranging their bodies in elaborate displays to spread terror. The stakes were sharpened and covered in oil to allow easier penetration into the victim's body, ensuring a slow and agonizing death. Some reports claim that he impaled tens of thousands of people during his reign. Inkle. War, corrupt nobles, criminals, and even beggars whom he viewed as a burden to society. One of the most chilling stories about Vlad comes from an Easter feast in 1459 when he invited Wallachian nobles, boyars, to a grand banquet. During the meal, he accused them of betraying his family and conspiring against him. Without warning, his guards surrounded the guests. The older nobles were immediately impaled, while the younger ones were forced into slavery. Only an act of revenge, but also a way to consolidate power by eliminating those who might oppose him. Vlad also had an extreme stance on morality and crime. He believed in absolute justice, punishing criminals and traitors with horrifying methods. It is said that he once placed a golden cup in the center of Targovist, his capital, allowing anyone to drink from it. Despite its immense value, no one dared to steal it, fearing the ruthless punishment they would face. For theft, corruption, and adultery, sometimes even skinning or boiling criminals alive. His terrifying reputation was not limited to his own people. When the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed Roman II marched into Wallachia in 1462, he and his army were met with a horrifying sight, a forest of impaled corpses outside Targovist. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers, prisoners, and local criminals had been executed and left to rot. The gruesome scene so horrifying Vlad was capable of. Yet, despite his cruelty, some argue that his reign brought stability and security. His iron-fisted rule kept crime at an unprecedented low, and he maintained order in a region plagued by treachery and war. His extreme punishments may have been brutal, but they were also a tool of psychological warfare, deterring both internal dissent and foreign invasions. Vlad's reign was defined by terror, but whether he was a bloodthirsty tyrant or a strict depends on perspective. While his methods were undeniably gruesome, they were also remarkably effective, a fact that contributed to his enduring legend as both a historical figure and a mythical monster. Vlad Roman III rule was not just defined by internal purges and strict justice. He was also a fierce military leader who fought relentlessly against the expansion of the Ottoman Empire into Europe. His battles against the powerful forces of Sultan maimed Roman ruthless tactics and unyielding resistance. But was he a noble defender of Christendom or simply a warlord driven by personal vengeance? Vlad's hostility toward the Ottomans had deep personal roots. As a child, he and his younger brother Radu the Handsome were sent as hostages to the Ottoman court as part of a political deal made by their father, Vlad Roman II Dracul. While Radu adapted and later became a close ally of the Ottomans, Vlad harbored deep resentment. Youth among his future enemies, observing their military strategies and learning their weaknesses. After reclaiming his throne in 1456, Vlad's immediate focus was resisting Ottoman influence. He refused to pay tribute to maimed Roman II, the same sultan who had conquered Constantinople in 1453, and instead launched a brutal campaign against Ottoman garrisons stationed along the Danube. His army conducted devastating raids, burning villages. Most legendary military action was the night attack of 1462, when he led a daring assault on the Ottoman camp. Under the cover of darkness, Vlad and his men disguised themselves as Ottoman soldiers and infiltrated the massive camp of maimed Roman II army, which outnumbered Vlad's forces by tens of thousands. Their mission was to assassinate the Sultan himself, hoping that chaos would break out among the invaders. While the attempt failed, maimed survived. The attack caused Ottomans to retreat temporarily. Vlad also used psychological warfare to its fullest extent. When Maimed's army later marched toward Targovist, they encountered a horrifying sight, a forest of impaled corpses stretching for miles. Thousands of Ottoman prisoners and traitors had been executed and left to rot in full view of the advancing troops. The gruesome spectacle had the desired effect. It struck fear into the hearts of the Sultan's soldiers and reportedly made his campaign against Wallachia. Despite these victories, Vlad's war efforts took a toll. He was betrayed by his own nobles, who saw his brutal rule as a greater threat than Ottoman domination. In the wake of mounting opposition, he was forced to flee to Hungary, where he was arrested and held captive for over a decade by King Matthias Corvinus. Meanwhile, his brother Radu, who had pledged loyalty to the Ottomans, was installed as the new ruler of Wallachia. After years in cap, eventually regained his freedom and made a final attempt to reclaim his throne in 1476. However, his return was short-lived. In a battle against the Ottomans later that year, he was killed, possibly betrayed once again by his own men. His exact fate remains uncertain, but his severed head was reportedly sent to maimed Roman II in Constantinople, where it was displayed on a pike as a warning to others who dared resist Ottoman rule. Was Vlad Roman III tyrant who ruled through fear? The answer depends on perspective. To his enemies, he was a terrifying warlord who committed unspeakable atrocities. To those who valued Wallachia independence, he was a symbol of defiance against a seemingly unstoppable empire. One thing is certain: his legacy endures, not only in history books, but in the chilling legends that continue to surround his name. Vlad Roman III, known as Vlad the Impaler, was a real historical figure, but over this, intertwined with one of the most famous fictional characters in history, Count Dracula. How did a brutal 15th century Wallachian ruler become the inspiration for the legendary vampire? The answer lies in a combination of folklore, propaganda, and the creative imagination of Bram Stoker. During Vlad's lifetime, his actions were widely reported across Europe. German and Russian pamphlets from the late 15th and early 16th centuries described his horrific methods. Sadistic tyrant who took pleasure in torture. These exaggerated accounts depicted Vlad as a bloodthirsty monster, spreading fear among those who read about his impalement practices. The printing press, which was still a relatively new invention at the time, allowed his terrifying reputation to spread far beyond Wallachia. One of the myths that contributed to his later transformation into Dracula was the accusation that he drank the blood of his enemies. Some reports suggested, among the impaled corpses of his victims, even dipping his bread in their blood. While there is no solid historical evidence to support these claims, such stories played a major role in shaping the legend of Dracula. However, Vlad himself was never believed to be a vampire in his time. The true connection to vampirism came centuries later, in 1897, when Irish author Bram Stoker published his novel Dracula. Stoker's book introduced the world to a Transylvanian lived in a dark, cursed castle. While there is no evidence that Stoker extensively researched Vlad Roman III, he borrowed his name and some elements of his history to create his character. Stoker may have been inspired by Romanian folklore, which was rich in stories about strigoi, undead spirits or vampires that preyed on the living. Many of these legends existed long before Vlad Roman III, but after the publication of Dracula, they became linked to his name. The idea, victims and returned from the dead, fit perfectly with the themes of vampire mythology. The novel's success cemented Vlad's association with the vampire myth, and the character of Count Dracula became an icon of horror fiction. Over the years, countless films, television shows, and books have reimagined the story of Dracula, often straying far from the historical figure who inspired it. One of the earliest and most famous adaptations was the 1922 silent film Nosfer. Orlok bore many similarities to Stoker's Dracula, but had a distinct, grotesque appearance. Despite these fictional adaptations, the real Vlad Roman III remains a significant historical figure. In Romania, he is remembered not as a supernatural creature, but as a national hero who defended his homeland against Ottoman invasion. However, outside of Romania, his name is almost always associated with the undying legend of Count Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, and culture, blending history and horror into a single, unforgettable myth. While the historical Vlad was a brutal and controversial ruler, his transformation into the world's most famous vampire is a testament to the power of storytelling. Whether seen as a warrior, a tyrant, or a monster, his name has endured for centuries, forever linked to the chilling world of the undead.